It's 12:04 in the afternoon on this Wednesday, and since it is Wednesday, that means it's Joe Steckler Day, helping seniors of Brevard. And here's your host of the show and the founder of Helping Seniors of Brevard, Joe Steckler. Hi, Joe.
Hi, John. You know, before I even get into the show today, folks, I want to give a guy tip today. If you're really smart guys, with this weather going down, what you want to do is keep your wife away from watching the television temperature or the radio temperatures so they don't make you bring all those plants in from outside, bringing all the lizards inside and sometimes those little bitty snakes that come out of those plants, and you get those things in the house. So, guys, don't let your wife even watch television. Tell her it's broken.
Well, tell Terry, Joe, that the temperatures won't be that cold for the next couple of days now.
Yeah, but
we're through the cold temperatures.
But these weathercasters, hell, John, they'll get it down low because they want to make. They're probably trying to make points for their wives. No, just kidding, guys. But look. When it's borderline temperature like that, do your very best to tell her that it's just not going to get any colder, and see if you can keep from having to move all that stuff inside. Anyway,
all right.
The show, Helping Seniors, is designed to help seniors and those that care for seniors. And, of course, my tip does help seniors because a lot of us are the old guys, the old gals have all those plants. But having said that, joking aside, my guest today is Bill Johnson, elder law attorney. And Bill, I asked Bill what he wanted to talk about, and he said he just really, really liked to sort of close 1919 out and maybe pass on some information that we haven't thought about. And this applies to both men and women, because in my own case, I found that a lot of times I fail to tell my wife about some of the stuff I got squirreled away in some of the file folders in the drawer, and if something should happen to me, then the guy she'd have to go to would be Scott Glover, our financial guy, and Bill Johnson, who is our attorney. So, it's just not fair one to the other folks to not have those conversations. And I sort of say that with tongue-in-cheek because I haven't been as good about it as I'd like to talk about it. So I'd like to welcome Bill this morning to the show, and so having said that, welcome, Bill.
Oh, thank you, Joe.
You know, I go back a long time, and there's been a lot of advice that you've given over the shows, and one of these days I'm going to go back to about 15 years of folders and look through some of those shows and just reach in there and pull out a couple of shows that you and I have did maybe 10 years ago and bring one of them out of here and do it like we had just written it that day. And the chances are, Bill, that the questions could be the same, the answers might be a little bit different.
Very true, very true.
Yeah, it's a sad state of affairs, and I told Bill when we started the show this morning that I found some more people that have waited until they were in a crisis situation before they even thought about putting their documents in place, and that's not the time for it. And Bill, can you give our radio listeners a few of the really most glaring reasons why it's not wise to wait until a situation happens in order to take care of solving it?
Well, one is usually when you're in a crisis, that's not the best time to be dealing with all this. You are typically dealing with making sure your health care is taken care of, and, to have to go to a lawyer's office, get documents done, and then, go to the bank and do all kinds of things is really not what you want to be doing when you have a medical emergency. Now, also, the other big one is that somebody may lack capacity at that point. If they've had a stroke or if they have progressed as far as their dementia, goes that they're unable to manage their own health care and own finances, then they may not be able to execute any documents. And obviously, if somebody passes on and they don't have a will, well, it's way too late to do a will. And certainly, we would not, be able to honor their wishes unless it was written in a will form.
Yeah, an attorney has a responsibility to the law, as well as to the customer, because if a person doesn't get these documents in place, it's not fair to ask an attorney to sort of ad-lib a signature on a document that's not that really shouldn't be put in place because of a person's incapacity.
Very true. You should not be able to go to an attorney's office and have somebody who lacks capacity execute any kind of document.
Yeah, I was reading something I picked up off the internet, Bill, last night, and can you hear me all right?
I can hear you all right. I don't know about my mic or my headphones.
We got a little glitch. We're working on it right now, and our technician with the long gray beard has just come into the studio to see if he could solve the problem, and he's getting over to my controls and playing with the controls and the buttons and everything. You got it now, Bill?
Well, as long as everybody can hear me, I just don't seem to be able to hear myself when I talk into the mic.
He's telling you to switch the other mic there.
Okay, I can hear myself now.
Okay, don't play with those cords anymore now. We got this thing solved. Get out of here. Okay, no, I'm only kidding, folks. But according to a recent study, 80 million American families reported they haven't had a conversation about end of life, and 70% of end-of-life discussions occur only after a traumatic event or health crisis.
I told you I firmly believe that. Most people just put their head in the sand and ignore that.
Well, and it's really bad, because what happens at Helping Seniors, we get a lot of calls, especially over a holiday period such as the one that's occurring now with Christmas coming on and the New Year starting, and people all of a sudden are realizing that they need to start thinking about protecting themselves. And sometimes, we don't know when we're going to have a stroke. We don't know. We don't know when a crisis is going to befall us. We don't know we're going to get in a car accident, or know when we're going to be incapacitated. I had a stroke, but I was lucky. I had, because of you, every document in place that I needed for my wife to access our financial accounts. We had a trust set up, the house, the car, all our financial assets would all go to her in case of something happened to me. And Bill, I've heard so many people say, well, I don't have enough assets to do all that, Joe. What's the fallacy in that statement?
Well, we need people not only to manage your assets, but we also need people to apply for public benefits, sign tax returns, all kinds of other tasks. And if you haven't given anybody the authority to do that, we may be stuck.
And just because we've got some new tax laws in place, it doesn't obviate the need to really have somebody that knows the system that can talk to us. And ideally, I think one of the shows I want to get back, and we got on a New Year, is get you paired with one of our financial advisors and get the two of you together on a radio show where you can reinforce each other or shoot holes in the other's theory.
Well, that will be interesting.
Well, that's always a challenge,
yeah,
you know?
Yeah.
And that points out something else, Bill. Not every attorney, not every financial advisor, no one has all the answers.
I agree. I mean, you have to surround yourself with people who are going to educate you and who have the knowledge to do so.
Now, over the years, I've learned a heck of a lot from you, and I'm sure that I've been able to pass things on to you, even though you have the credentials to help people deal with almost any crisis involving elder law. And I don't want to belittle any attorney, anybody that's passed the bar, but there are people, I think, that hold themselves out to be an elder law attorney, and when they diversify and they get themselves in elder law, corporate law, but I'm not sure if somebody, do attorneys still do that? Try to, in order to, the smaller attorneys, in order to make a living, do they try to get in all fields of law, or is there more of a tendency to specialize like doctors do?
Well, there are attorneys out there who try to do it all, and usually they don't become a specialist in anything, and usually that creates a problem for their clients later. But more and more, the way the market goes is everybody is a specialist in something.
And, you know, with the complications that are being presented to the American public now with changes in the tax laws, so many changes in Medicare. And let's talk about this for a second. Somebody just said to me, "Hey, Joe, look, they say right there on television that Medicare covers vision plans, dental plans, hearing aids. It does all this." And I said to that person, I said, "No, it doesn't." I said, "What they're talking about is a Medicare Advantage plan or a special supplement that covers this. Medicare per se, traditional Medicare, does not cover vision plans, hearing aids, or anything like that." Am I correct or not?
You are correct. They are adding them now to the Advantage plans, and that is what is one of the things that's being rolled out this year.
But there's a danger there, Bill, and that so many people might opt to go into a Medicare Advantage plan because it all looks good, but if they're doing a lot of traveling and they get out of the state, get out of the reaches of their Medicare Advantage plan, they might find that certain sicknesses they might have on the road traveling are not covered unless it's a medical emergency. And that's a key word, medical emergency.
You're correct, because it is a kind of like a preferred provider network. You know, the old HMO, PPO.
Right.
So if you're out of network, unless it's an emergency, you have to get authorization if available, and then, you know, you will have a larger share of cost, whereas traditional Medicare is taken everywhere.
And, you know, I hate to think what people might get involved with in trying to go through the government to correct a mistake that's made in that plan. And to give you an example, I leased a new car. I knew that my lease plan through my checking account to the bank would get messed up some way because it has on 3 previous transactions of me purchasing this new car. It gets screwed up every time. I pointed that out to the dealership again this year, and again, it got messed up. And I was on the phone, but it came out here this morning, and some of the questions they ask you and some of the things you have to go through, And it makes it even harder because a lot of these things happen to older people, and it's a doggone hard to understand these people that talk a mile a minute on a telephone.
Right.
And, you can make a mistake. And when you make a mistake in reading a number from a bank account or a routing number and you try to correct it, it's almost impossible to do that.
Yep. And let alone get a human on the phone.
Oh, that's what I was trying to do, was get a human on the phone that I could talk to correct the problem. And now, folks, translate what Bill and I are talking to all the millions of Americans I pointed out to before, that despite the fact that you listen to us talk on this radio show, and right now I do not know how many people are listening, but I know there are a lot of people listening, and if you would just pass on to your family and to your friends some of the concerns that Bill and I are talking about, you could do yourself a huge favor. And having said that, Bill, I know that there are certain documents that everybody should have in place, especially as we move into the new years. A two-part question. First, can you tell our listening audience what the documents are that they need to have in place? And once you do that, tell them which of these documents need to be looked at annually so that they are not out of date and they can make a claim for whatever they have to do.
Well, generally, everyone should have a last will and testament. That is what happens to your assets upon your death. Then you should, in addition to that, have a whole series of documents that deal with incapacity. What happens if you're unable to manage your health care or financial decision-making? The first of those would be a durable power of attorney for finances. And then in that document, you name somebody to basically do anything you could do with regard to your finances, buy, sell assets, write checks, sign tax returns, apply for public benefits, sign an admission agreement to the hospital or nursing home, whatever needs to be done. You need to be able to trust that person because obviously you're turning over the keys to your financial kingdom because they can run around and sign your name and access all of these things. But you need to have somebody in place to do that. Also, we need somebody to make your health care decisions. Generally in Florida, we do that through something called a designation of health care surrogate. And you name somebody to make your health care decisions if you're unable to. You also need a living will, which is your end-of-life decisions, whether or not you want life support continued, if you're in either a terminal condition, an end-stage condition, and a persistent vegetative state. And obviously you are incapacitated, meaning you couldn't tell the doctor yourself. And so you designate whether or not you want life support continued, and also usually whether or not you want a feeding tube if it's only prolonging the dying process. So as a basic, you need all those documents. Now, your optional one may be a do not resuscitate order. If you have a terminal condition and you were to pass from, say, a heart attack, do you want to be resuscitated if it's just going to prolong the dying process and the suffering? You could also add in there a pre-need guardian declaration, who you want to be your guardian if we have to go to court and have you legally declared incapacitated. Generally, if you have the durable power of attorney for finances and the designation of healthcare surrogate, we won't have to go to court to have you declared incapacitated because you've already gone and designated somebody to make your financial and healthcare decisions ahead of time. And as you've talked about, Joe, a lot of people haven't done that. I think the average number of people who even have a living will after the whole Terry Schiavo thing is only about 30% of the general public.
And that's terrible, Bill.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one thing that in all these years we've not talked about, and it's something I would like for you to talk a little bit about this morning, or this afternoon, and that's this business of a document that enables somebody else to make decisions on the do not resuscitate form. This is something that's always bothered me, and here's my particular quirk. How does the doctor or the person that you have designated to make this decision know for certain that you're not going to come back if they do use the paddles on you and bring you back? How does a doctor know that? Have you come across that?
Well, I mean, if you're at the end of life and you are, failing fast from, say, terminal cancer or something, and all of a sudden your heart gives out because you've had 18 bouts of chemo, that's pretty certain that, if they didn't use the paddles, you would just expire.
Okay, I can understand a situation like that, but what about a person who just has a heart attack? They've been in good health, and there's a chance that, well, how does the
if it's just like somebody off the street, they wouldn't have a do not resuscitate order. The only people who really do not resuscitate orders are people who are failing health, and they don't want to prolong the misery in the dying process.
But when we did our trust, and we put all those documents in as part of our trust, I gave that power to my wife to make that decision. That's a big burden to place on her.
Well, that was actually part of your living will. That's the end-of-life decision, whether or not you want to be kept alive by like a ventilator or a feeding tube if it's just prolonging the dying process. Okay. The do not resuscitate order you actually get from your physician's office. It has to be signed by you and the doctor saying that you do not want to be brought back to life if you should pass.
Okay. Now, I ask you a pretty basic question. I wonder how many people to go in and get a will made out. Okay, we got to take a break. Okay, we got 2 more minutes. I wonder how many more people that are thinking about what we're talking about this morning, and they have a fear of making the wrong decision. And
there's quite a lot of people who do that, because a lot of people mull over, at least when we do a living will, a lot of people mull over what those definitions are.
Okay.
And they really kind of pick through that and say, well, how long do I have to be incapacitated, or how long do I have to be in a persistent vegetative state before somebody's going to pull the plug? And so a lot of people generally do. In my living will, I designate somebody to make those interpretation questions. There is somebody designated whose purpose is to carry out the wishes in the living will. That way we have actually, as they say, boots on the ground with somebody who can adjust it to the circumstance.
It's a big decision, isn't it?
Yes, it is a big decision. Back to, last time we talked about living wills, I brought up the Nancy Cruzan case, the Karen Ann Quinlan case, obviously the Terry Schiavo case. And you know what all those people have in common?
What?
They were all under 30 years old. So it's never too early to get a living will. I mean, that's why they have cases, because those cases were big cases because the people were young. Obviously, if somebody at 85 has a living will, that's, everybody goes, they lived a long life and it's their time. But when you have somebody under 30, that makes for a very contested matter if family members disagree.
You really like that number 85, don't you?
85?
Yeah. I'll be glad when the next few days go by and I'll be 86, so you can't pick on me for 85 anymore.
Joe, you're 29 forever.
You know, we're getting ready to take a mid-show break. But if it wasn't for this doggone fibromyalgia and my doggone knees giving way and I didn't know if I was going to fall and break my keister half the time, I'd like to think that I feel a heck of a lot younger in how I approach life, Bill, and I wish a lot of people would think about doing that too. So with that thought, we're going to take our quick mid-show break, and we're going to come back, and we're going to talk about some specifics on a last will and testament, because I think it's something that this is a particular time of the year people need to think about what they haven't done. So stay with us for the next part of the show. I think you'll find some interesting topics.
It's 12:33 here on 90.3 FM. It's Wednesday, Helping Seniors of Brevard Day, with your host, Joe Steckler. And once again, here's Joe.
Thank you, John. We're back live with my panelists today, Bill Johnson, elder law attorney. But before we start the show, I just want everybody to know that the brand new issue of Senior Scene magazine, we finally got back on track. They are at 500 locations throughout Brevard County, and I highly encourage you to get a copy of the magazine because, of course, I want you to read my articles that are in there, but I also want you to read our Senior Scene newsletter because it has a lot of information about things that could help you, especially at the holiday time. But there's also a new directory in there that we are trying to target organizations, businesses, places like handymen, pressure cleaners, roofers, things that do things that seniors need, that we would like to see seniors get a fair shake on price. So we have started a directory. And I know a lot of you listen, and some of you call when I ask for something, but I'm going to keep asking more because a lot of you have businesses that help you, and they are fair businesses. They give you a good price. They trust you. You trust them. I would appreciate it if you would call Kim, our word information specialist at Helping Seniors, and the phone number is area code 321-473-7770. And please tell Kim that you heard me make this plea on our radio show and that you've got somebody good that you want her to contact to see if they want to be in our news services directory that is an attachment in the center of Senior Scene magazine, folks. And believe me, when the senior can look in a place and find something that they know can help them that's sort of been vetted, then you stand a better chance of getting a good service that's honest, that'll do what they say they'll do. And that's one of the reasons why we started this organization, to help seniors, to help you get the right information, to help you get attorneys that would get you the service that you needed, to help you get pressure cleaners that will wash the doggone driveway and the roof the right way and not ruin all your shrubbery. So there's so many things to think about that you don't think about as you get older. Start trusting somebody that is trying to put something in place to help you. So again, if you got somebody that you think is a good organization that you want to tout and you want us to advertise for, call Kim at 321-473-7770. Give her the information so she can call them and see them about getting in our directory. It's a year-long service. The cost for it to advertise in this thing on a monthly basis, going to 500 different pickup points throughout the county, is $250 a year for the whole shebang. You will not find that kind of cost any place in any advertising. I assure you that I speak the truth. So having made that plea and pitch for you to help us help you, I'm going to get back to the second part of the show here, and I'm going to read some things, then we're going to talk about them individually. It's talking about a last will and testament, and I'm going to read 6 parts of it, and I asked Bill to talk about each of them. The first thing, a will should include basically the following things. Now, if I'm right, I want Bill to say. If I'm wrong, I want him to correct me. An executor. It should name the beneficiaries. It should name your personal properties, your business assets, your debts, expenses, and taxes, and special instructions. And there are certain ways to do all these things, but it's most important. A lot of people have heard about something called a codicil to a will. It's not just enough that you write down these things on a piece of paper. That verbiage has got to be in your will, that they've got to look for the codicil. Is that correct, Bill?
Well, the codicil is actually an amendment to a will.
Okay.
So, but all those things are very important. Probably the most important thing, which isn't on that list, is properly execute the will.
I knew you'd get me.
Yeah, because in Florida, we have very stringent requirements on the execution of will. The testator has to sign in the presence of both the witnesses, and the witnesses and the testator have to acknowledge that they saw each other sign the document in each other's presence. And then generally we attach to that something called a self-proof, where a notary basically signs an affidavit saying she saw the testator and the witnesses sign the will. And then the will becomes self-proving, meaning we don't have to, when you pass, we don't have to go find the witnesses to the will and have them sign affidavits that they saw you sign. So very important, the execution. The executor, we call that personal representative in Florida. That's the person charged with taking the will to court and then getting appointed, marshaling the assets, and then obviously paying off your just debts. The beneficiaries are the people who, after we marshal the assets, pay the debts and the cost of administration. The beneficiaries are the ones who get the assets, however you'd like them to get it. So that brings us to those special instructions. If you want to give somebody a dollar amount, you can do that. Or if you just want to say they get 1/3 of whatever's left over, you can do that. And if you're dealing with, spendthrift kids or younger kids, you may want to say they get a certain amount at age 18, some at 25, and some at 30, or, some more if they graduate with a 4-year degree. Whatever you want to put in there, you can do that. Generally, your personal property is going to be, the stuff in your house, your cars. Tangible personal property in Florida can be devised by a separate written list that's kept with the will signed by the testator. So we don't have to go specifically enumerate who gets the china, jewelry, guns, that kind of stuff. You can make up your own list. That way, if you change your mind, you rip up the list, make a new list. So, but that does not hold true for intangible personal property, which would be cash, securities, or real estate, which would be real property. And then debts, expenses, and taxes. Usually there's some statement in the will about how those are to be paid or apportioned amongst the beneficiaries. Are we taking all that stuff off the top, or is each beneficiary's share responsible for paying for some of that?
Okay, so. You remember you did pretty good. You got 5 out of the 6.
I've done a few of these.
I know, but what do they mean by business assets?
Well, if you own a company, if you own a business, you have an LLC or a sub-S corporation, or or you have a house you rent, that kind of stuff. Those are all businesses. Who's going to get those? How are we going to divvy it up? Are we going to keep them as an ongoing entity? Or is it going to be liquidated and then we're going to take those monies and divide them amongst everybody?
Okay, now a person does not have a will, and they have some pretty good businesses, and they have, I said, they have $1 million in the bank and assets put aside to give their kids, and they don't have a will. That will then must go through probate. Is that correct or not?
Well, if you have a will, wills all go through probate.
Wait a minute, say it again.
Wills go through probate.
All wills go through probate?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, not all assets go through probate. So the will only applies to the assets that go through probate. And, if you recall on another show, I talked about assets that don't go through probate, and examples of that would be an asset that's jointly owned with the surviving joint owner, an asset that has a beneficiary on it, or an asset that's in a trust. Those are all examples of assets that don't go through probate. So the will only applies to the assets that actually go through probate.
Okay, let's say a person owns a house, and you don't have a will.
Okay.
What happens to the house?
Well, typically, if they're married, you own it as husband and wife. One of you dies, the survivor owns it by virtue of the joint titling. And then when the survivor dies, the will would come into play. If the house is not in a trust or is not, doesn't have a beneficiary on the deed, like what we call a ladybird deed.
So, if I'm hearing you correctly, one of the best, most foolproof ways to keep yourself out of trouble or to do what we're talking about would be to have a trust.
Well, a trust certainly would keep the assets out of going through probate. And you want to avoid probate because in Florida, typically a lawyer can charge 3% of the value of the assets going through probate. And then on top of it, it takes quite a while, 10 to 12 months, sometimes longer.
So if you don't have a will, and let's say a person had a stamp collection or a coin collection or some type of thing that was really, really valuable.
Well, if you don't specifically give that to somebody, either in the will or by a separate written list, then it's just a part of the estate. And we have a appraisal done of what it's worth, and then either it gets sold and the proceeds divided amongst the beneficiaries, or maybe one of the beneficiaries wants to take that particular asset as part of their share.
But I'm saying if a person doesn't have a will.
Well, if they don't have a will, there is an intestate statute that determines who gets what. Basically, if you're married and your kids are also your wife's kids, okay, so all your kids also are your wife's kids, then typically everything will go to the spouse. If, however, your children are not all of your spouse's children, meaning that you had children from a prior marriage or, prior to your marriage, then the estate, or the probate estate, gets split 50-50 between the kids and the spouse.
So what you've done, instead of clearing up all this stuff at the year end, is we've created a nightmare.
Yes.
You don't have the documents you need in place.
Yeah, and there's some, if you're married, there are also some other laws that come into effect. The homestead, where a surviving spouse, even if their name's not on the deed, gets a life interest in the homestead, as well as the elective share, where a surviving spouse can claim up to 30% of the decedent spouse's estate, and that's with a big E. That would be not only the probate assets, but any assets that pass by virtue of the person's death.
How do you remember all this?
I live it every day.
All the more reason for people that have a decent-sized estate, maybe have a beautiful home that they've spent years furnishing, that they're quite proud of it, and have a lot of family heirlooms that they're having a difficult time in trying to see which children should inherit which, and all this stuff involved in the daily living of life when you're worried about your own health and you've got things you're still trying to do and you're getting older. A lot of people, Bill, simply don't think
Well, that's generally why you need to go see a professional to do all this. The other thing is, how do I remember all this, is I also litigate all this. And I think, at least from my perspective, if you've litigated a lot of these issues, wills and trusts and guardianship issues, you're also very aware of where all the pitfalls are and the trouble spots.
That's the same thing. That's why we do this radio show. We do the radio show to try to point out to our listeners that there are things that no matter how much you think you know as an expert in so many things that you've read about, you can never read, and I don't think you can ever understand all the pitfalls, all the ramifications of what could happen if you don't put the correct pins in place in those clothesline holders.
My daughter bought me a mug for Christmas, and it says, "Your Google search is not as good as my law degree."
Your Google search is not as good as my law degree?
Yeah. Meaning people come in all the time and they have stuff they've pulled off the internet and they think that makes them an expert in that particular field and that all the answers are out there. And then you tell them, well, there's case law out there too. Did you research all the case law? And then you have this huge roundabout discussion with them, and then you tell them you've litigated all these things and how the courts view it. And so there's a lot more than just what you can read on the internet.
Right. But wouldn't you appreciate, Bill, clients coming in and being able to ask you intelligent questions about what they've either failed to do or what they need to put in place that could help you understand more how you could help them better?
Well, I think the Google search, for example, does have a good place in that people can go and now access some information about the topic so that when they come in now, I get a lot of the questions they have are a lot better questions, that are pretty well thought out because they've done some education on their own.
Yes, and I think the same thing. I think the same thing is going to have to apply more to the doctor-patient relationship, because doctors. I'm fortunate. I've got a primary care that has monitored me for 30 years, and I trust the man. And I think he has my best care first and foremost in his mind, and I can see him on his computer when I ask him a question. If he's not quite certain, I can see him searching to make sure he's going to give me the right information. But I think that we're going to see this more in terms of...
But Joe, like when I go for a checkup, I get there and I get to sit with the doctor for, 15 minutes. And in 15 minutes, you can't go over all the possible permutations of your health. I'm on a pill now because my blood sugar is creeping up. And I've never had a problem with blood sugar, so I was kind of curious why all of a sudden is my blood sugar creeping up. And I started looking at what are the side effects of these other medications I'm taking, and one of them, of course, is increases your blood sugar. Statin, for example, increase your blood sugar level.
Yeah.
So then you end up taking a pill because you're taking a pill, and you start taking pills for your pills.
I know.
But if you don't do the research, nobody else tells you this stuff. Everybody just wants to prescribe you another pill.
I go back, I got a couple of minutes, I'll tell a quick story. When I came into the Naval Home, I had a guy that he would come in and see me every once in a while, and he was concerned about his health. And he was taking a bunch of pills. In fact, he was taking 21 pills. And I said, 21 in the same doctor? He said, no, I'm getting those pills from 3 different doctors. I said, have you told the other 2 doctors the kind of pills you're getting? He said, well, no. I said, well, you can't do that. So a couple of weeks went by, and he came in to see me, and I said, "What did you decide to do?" He said, "I just stopped taking them all, and I'm fine."
Can't do that either.
No, you can't do that. But he did.
Well, I mean, in my case, I could literally quit taking the statin, but at least in what my research showed, that usually they only prescribe a statin when the risks of, having a heart problem outweigh the risk of increasing your blood sugar. But nobody ever gave me that choice. That's what I'm trying to point out.
Yeah.
People were like, well, take this because your cholesterol's high.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that there would be all these other repercussions of taking that drug. And also, a lot of statin use has been linked to, dementia and things like that. So, long-term memory problems. So,
I was thinking about putting a long-term care insurance guy on with you for a couple of shows. Maybe I ought to put you on with Dr. Lee Sheldon, who is a dentist that loves to talk about the stuff that you're just talking about now, and who has done a heck of a lot of research in all this stuff. And it's surprising, Bill, just because a person is an attorney or a doctor or a financial expert or a home mortgage loan expert, you don't know until you put a couple people on a show how much they know about another topic that can really make for a good show.
It's very interesting to go and actually research, pull up the drugs you're on and just go to even like WebMD and find out what, the side effects are, because a lot of people don't tell you what the potential. I had another medication that had a side effect, and then I found a bunch of people talking about, well, the way we got around this was we cut that medication in half and we took this other medication, and I proposed that to my doctor. Doctor agreed, and we've been doing that, and I got rid of the other side effect. So it worked.
Oh, boy. I'm not even going to start there with my doctor. I got enough problems now, and I don't want to start cutting pills and half anything else. I mean, my luck, he'd say you have to cut the ones that got all the things behind those plastic things, and when you cut the pill in half, it'd fall out on one side. So, anyway, we're just about to run out of time, and it's getting pretty close to the end of the year.
But I guess the moral of the story is, if you had to sum up the show in one breath, would be educate yourself. Listen to this show. You're certainly getting an education on some legal topics. Educate yourself on your health, including the medicines you're taking. Obviously, get your documents done so that you have, and if you have questions about that, go on the internet and educate yourself so that when you go for one of these free consultations with an attorney, you have some, genuine questions to ask the attorney.
And hopefully, as the new year plays out, the law office of Bill Johnson won't be so doggone busy because you're giving out so much doggone good advice. I can't get people in to see you for 4 or 5 weeks. So the best thing to do, folks, if you think you got a problem, you want to make it give old Bill a call. And I call him so many times I don't even have to have him give the number because I want to have a chance of him having to look up his own phone number. It's area code 321-253-1667.
Very good.
253-1667. And what's the name of the person that answers the phone over there?
Carrie.
Carrie?
Yep.
He's good.
Yes, she's very good.
He's very good, and I like to tease her, and she is equally adept at getting back at me. So I always enjoy talking to her. I enjoy talking to Melanie. The people on your staff are very friendly. They're very knowledgeable, and most of all, they want to help people. And we got 3 minutes to go, so I want to talk about Christmas. I want to talk about the new year. I want to talk about 2020. Bill Johnson, as a guy that's very, very connected with the National Association of Elder Law Attorneys, do you foresee anything happening in 2020 that is going to be of significance in the way we have to think about our legal plans, rights for the new year?
I don't see anything right now on the foreseeable future that's coming up as far as the Florida legislature goes. They're doing some proposed legislation with regard to guardianship and doing a little revamping of the assisted living facility bill. But there's nothing major on the horizon for anything coming down the pike, at least statewide. And federally, I haven't really heard of much in the way federally. There's a few agency things going on, but no like huge big piece of legislation that would come through.
I want to echo what you're saying because I've seen the same thing happen. But there's one thing that I would like to see. We got 2 minutes to go, and there's one thing I would like to see happen is that more of our elected officials taking an interest in affordable housing. And the reason I say that is my wife and I went to a recent meeting involving some of the pitfalls that the private investors have to encounter as they develop affordable housing. And one of the big ones are these doggone impact fees that all of our county and city officials have. And it's really hurting our ability to develop affordable housing.
Well, there is a bill to create a task force to look at affordable housing for seniors right in front of the legislature this year.
Maybe I'll look and see how I can get on it. We're just about out of time. So I'd like to take this time to wish you, Bill Johnson, and your staff and all your people a very, very Merry Christmas and a very, very prosperous New Year. And I hope that you'll continue to help as many people in 2020 as you've done in the last 30 years.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I say that because I've enjoyed our friendship, and I've enjoyed the fact that John is telling me to wipe it up, wrap it up, not wipe it up, wrap it up, because, sometimes you say the wrong word. But, no, I'm not going to make it funny. Wrap it up. We'll stay with wrap it up, even though I messed it up. And thanks, Bill, for being a friend.
Don't use the word mess up.
Okay, we're not going to mess up. Stay with us, and we'll see you next week with Dr. E. Sheldon. Bye-bye.